Imagine this. It's the dead of night, and you're outnumbered, facing more than 1,000 enemy soldiers bent on destroying your position. Mortars are slamming the ground around you, explosions lighting up the sky. You're injured, battered, and nearly unconscious. Most would surrender to the chaos, but not Army Sgt. First Class Sammy Lee Davis. What he did next secured his place in history and earned him the Medal of Honor. This is his story, a tale of raw courage, unwavering determination, and a heart big enough to risk everything for his brothers in arms. A legacy of service. Sammy Lee Davis was born on November 1st, 1946, in Dayton, Ohio. Raised primarily outside Stockton, California, he grew up in a family that understood duty and sacrifice. His father had fought in World War II, his grandfather in the Spanish-American War, and his brothers served in Korea and Vietnam. Following in their footsteps seemed natural for Sammy, who felt a deep sense of responsibility to serve his country. After graduating from high school in 1966, Davis enlisted in the Army. Trained as a cannoneer, he was assigned to Battery C of the 2nd Battalion, 4th Artillery, 9th Infantry Division. By March 1967, Sammy found himself in Vietnam, operating in one of the most dangerous regions, the Mekong Delta, a maze of rivers, swamps, and enemy hideouts, the Battle of Firebase Cudgel. November 18, 1967. Firebase Cudgel, a remote outpost in Vietnam, became the stage for an extraordinary display of bravery. Around 2 a.m., a sudden Viet Cong mortar attack rocked the base. Explosions tore through the night, jolting soldiers awake. Within 30 minutes, over 1,500 Viet Cong soldiers launched a massive ground assault against the small American force of just 42 men. The enemy had managed to close in on the base, separated only by a narrow river 35 meters wide. When the assault began, Sammy immediately sprang into action. He grabbed a machine gun and fired relentlessly to cover his artillery crew as they scrambled to fire their howitzer. Suddenly, a recoilless rifle round hit the howitzer, destroying it and flinging Sammy into a nearby foxhole, unconscious. Defiance in the face of death. Sammy woke up moments later, battered, bleeding, and surrounded by chaos. Friendly troops, unaware he was alive, fired a devastating beehive round, a shell filled with thousands of dart-like projectiles meant for the enemy. Instead, Sammy was struck by some of these projectiles, adding to his injuries. In that moment of agony, Sammy made a decision. He crawled back to the damaged howitzer under continuous fire and loaded it with a beehive round. Despite the artillery piece being wrecked and flaming, Sammy fired at the advancing enemy. The weapon's recoil slammed him to the ground again, fracturing his spine. Even then, he stood back up and returned to load and fire the gun, 5 times in total, pushing the enemy forces back. Heroic river rescue, saving 3 lives. Amid the chaos, Sammy saw something that stopped him in his tracks. Across the river, 3 wounded comrades were frantically waving for help. Despite his injuries and knowing he couldn't swim, Sammy found an air mattress, pushed himself into the water, and began crossing. Bullets sprayed the river as the enemy tried to take him down, but Sammy pushed on. Reaching the other side, he hoisted the most critically wounded soldier onto his back and carried the other 2 in his arms. Moving slowly through the water, Sammy had to stop repeatedly to shoot back at the approaching enemy. Somehow, he brought all 3 men back to safety. Once they reached the base, Sammy handed them off for medical attention. But instead of seeking help for himself, he jumped back into the fight, assisting another howitzer crew. Together, they continued to fight off the Viet Cong until the enemy retreated at daybreak. Aftermath of bravery. By the time the battle ended, the cost was staggering. Of the 42 soldiers at Firebase Cudgel, only 12 survived. Sammy, realizing the extent of his wounds for the first time, passed out as medics worked to evacuate him. He spent months recovering in Japan, but even then, he refused to return home. Sammy specifically requested to rejoin his unit in Vietnam. In December 1967, his request was granted. Though his injuries prevented him from returning to combat, he served as a cook for 3 more months before being sent back to the US Medal of Honor ceremony. A year later, on November 19, 1968, Sammy Lee Davis was awarded the Medal of Honor by President Lyndon B. Johnson at a ceremony in the White House. His extraordinary heroism during that night in Firebase Cudgel became a symbol of what it means to be a true soldier. If you've ever seen Forrest Gump, you may recognize his Medal of Honor ceremony. It was recreated in the film, with Tom Hanks's face digitally replacing Sammy's. A life of advocacy and inspiration. Sammy Lee Davis didn't stop serving after the war. He became an advocate for Vietnam veterans, fighting for compensation and medical care for those exposed to Agent Orange. He organized parades to honor veterans who had never received the homecoming they deserved, and used his story to inspire others to persevere through challenges. In 2016, he shared his journey in a memoir titled, "You Don't Lose Till You Quit Trying: Lessons on Adversity and Victory from a Vietnam Veteran and Medal of Honor recipient." Sammy's life has become a testament to resilience and the power of never giving up. Conclusion: Sammy Lee Davis wasn't just a soldier. He was, and is, a symbol of courage, sacrifice, and relentless hope. His actions on that fateful night in Vietnam remind us all that heroes are defined not by their strength alone, but by their determination to rise, no matter the odds. This isn't just a story of war, it's a story of humanity, of bravery that refuses to quit, and of the bonds that make us risk everything for one another.